Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine 18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I am here with a Top Tarot Trumps video, VR to Masha over at Musings by Masha. And as folks know, by this point, I don't have to explain the tag, but we're sharing our favorite Major Arcana cards, one Major Arcana at a time every few weeks or so. And I have reached the point of talking about a Major Arcana card that I really like, and that is the Tower. So I have picked 5 Tower tarot cards to share with you, and I will talk through what I like about them, and in the process of doing so, I think convey something about how I see the Tower card, how I interpret it in readings, what I think of it as signifying, how I might work with that particular card. So I will timestamp my towers below. The first tower that I chose, or rather, again, as always, no particular order. The first tower that I will share with you now is the Tower card from the Tarot of Architectural Objects. And this is by Tina of Queen of Wands. You can find her on Instagram and elsewhere as Queen of Wands. This is a Make Playing Cards deck. And I like this tower because to me it captures the ominousness, if that's a word, of the Tower and the kinds of institutions that I think of the Tower as representing, the kinds of dynamics and relationships and ways of ordering society that I think of the Tower as representing. Here, those things are depicted in a way that to me feels scary, almost. Like this Tower is not welcoming. It is really looming over the viewer, in this dark sky. And, unlike maybe some of the Tower card images we're used to seeing, it hasn't been struck by lightning. It's not in the process of crumbling. If this is a tower that one would want to see brought down, then there's going to be work involved, right? Here the Tower is standing. And so this card in a reading to me invites thinking about, what kinds of towers are standing, right? And how one might approach one's relationship to those structures and institutions. And I think that the photograph is beautiful. I love Tina's decks. Naturescapes and Tarot of Architectural Objects are 2 of my absolute favorites. But I like the eeriness that this one captures. It's a different tone than I think a lot of other Tower cards give, because the Tower card is usually depicted as, having been struck by lightning, being in the process of toppling down, perhaps already having toppled down in some kind of way. And here I think the fact that it is not depicted that way might give some interesting angles on interpreting this card. And think about maybe, after the Tower card comes the Star, right? And all the hope of the Star is not visible here around this looming, ominous Tower. And so I like that depiction a lot. Now, I didn't on purpose choose all of the architecturally themed decks that I have for the Tower card, but this is how it has happened. The next Tower card I would like to show is the Tower from the Architect's Tarot by Yusuf Bushiri. I love this deck, as people know, and I love this Tower card. I think that it's really interesting for a number of reasons. I do think about the Tower in terms of hierarchical arrangements of things, right? I think a tower visually structurally invites that interpretation in a pretty literal and obvious way. And so I think that the crown being around the tower really captures that. You can see that here the lightning is striking the tower and the tower is starting to crumble. But I also think it's interesting how in this particular tower, I don't think the foundation of this tower could have possibly been the strongest to begin with, given this particular construction choice. There's water that would be eroding the foundation of this tower, and maybe the water has been eroding the foundation of this tower for a very long time, right? Since the tower was there. Since the tower was placed there, perhaps to divert the flow of this water, the water has been in its own slow way chipping away at the foundation of this tower, and it's the lightning strike that makes that collapse visible and spectacular in the sense of like a spectacle, and it makes it feel sudden. But I also think in this tower there is something about the crumbling of the tower that is not sudden because of the way that water is there. This tower card makes me think about the processes of toppling hierarchical structures that are slow and that are more erosion than lightning strike. And I really like this interpretation of the tower by Yusuf Bushiri for inviting that reflection from me. Next up, I have a deck that I've been showing a fair amount that nobody will be surprised that I put in this particular installment, I don't think. And that is Christy C. Rhodes' Next World Tarot. And in this deck, the tower card is Revolution. And so, very much in the terrain of tower toppling, right? And here we see a rig on fire in the background. Banner Defend the Sacred. There are people holding the banner and cheering and marching in the background. And then in the foreground you have an elder and a child planting flowers where this destructiveness once was. This, to me, is a depiction of the kind of visioning of the post-tower world and like the work of getting there. And the guidebook talks about fossil fuel industries specifically. It talks about different ways of challenging those, and it talks about, in more general terms, dismantling ways of living that are destructive. Dismantling ways of living that are destructive of life, that are fatal. And choosing other ways of living, and maybe experimenting with other ways of living even. I don't think the guidebook quite goes in that direction, but that's what I think of. And so I like that there's this emphasis in the foreground of that possibility with the child and the elder, and the child is maybe learning from the elder about planting there. I like that this spans, the way that the card is set up, the art is set up. The tower itself that is on fire is the background. And the background sometimes in tarot is the past. And so there's a kind of past and a struggle to change the ways of living, and then the possibilities of the future. And again, the tower leads into the star, right? And the possibilities and hope of the star. And I see hope in this card. A hope that is stubborn and insistent, and that does not give up on changing the world. And I really like that for a tower message. The next tower that I chose is from the Tarot of the North Atlantic. And this tower depicts, of course, an iceberg. And this image, you know, as maybe apparently simple as it is, I think is a really good one, because this, to me, there's like a lot of food for thought in this image. A iceberg like this, or glacier, you know, brings to mind the ways in which so much is not visible, right? The proportion of the iceberg there that is actually visible, in terms of being visible above the water, presuming one is above the water and not in it with the fish, the amount of it that is visible is minimal. Much more of it is hidden and harder to see, right? And so there's something about this image that makes me think about ways in which, you know, thinking about the tower again as these kinds of hierarchical social organization, thinking of the tower in terms of, kind of systems and structures, that it feels like at times only like the most fucking egregious aspects are really, really visible and are talked about and are acknowledged as problems. And so much of the foundations are left unquestioned, right? The foundations are left unacknowledged. The ideas and philosophies and presumptions about how the world works that allow for these kinds of towers stay unquestioned, while only the most obvious harms are pointed at as a problem. So there's something in this image of an iceberg that makes me think about the inadequacies of kind of reformist projects. Who would have thought that I would get that from this? I'm not surprised. There's definitely also something, I think, in this image very particularly about the climate and climate change and human-caused climate change, given, I think, the ways in which icebergs and icebergs melting and, you know, polar bears even have become particular kinds of images of global heating and the impacts of global heating that are being felt, you know, in different ways by different parts of the world, but certainly in particular kinds of ways by northern communities. And, you know, the animals not that call the North home. And so this, you know, makes me think of like all of the ramifications of that we aren't seeing yet. And it makes me think of melting icebergs in the worst possible way. So, you know, in some ways a simple image, but one that I think makes me pause. And I like when a tarot card does that. The final card that I would like to show is from the Hoodoo Tarot by Tiana Lee McQuillar. And this tower card is called the Big House. And this is a very confronting image in which a gloved hand that in the guidebook is described as a woman's hand is holding up rose-colored glasses to a plantation house. And through the rose-colored glasses can see the architecture of the plantation house, but cannot see the terror and death and destruction of that house. And you can see the people falling around the edges, and through the glass, this is not visible. And in the guidebook, she talks about plantation homes in the South and writes, "There is no greater symbol of Southern gentility than a majestic plantation home surrounded by lush Victorian gardens." Every year, millions of people from all around the world flock to the South for plantation tours as their guides prattle on about lemonade, quaint customs, and corseted balls during what many call a simpler time. What they don't tell you is that most of those villages and fields were already there and thriving prior to the arrival of foreigners. In other words, indigenous peoples were literally forced to work on their own land. So while this simpler time, in scare quotes, was certainly the reality for hundreds of prosperous slave owners, it was not for thousands of enslaved people and indentured servants. For them, the big house was far from beautiful and was instead an unpredictable house of horrors. And again, this is a card that demands thinking about what you're not seeing, about the foundations of systems. And I think that this is just a really, really powerful image. You know, that demands thinking about what kind of lens one sees the world through. And, you know, that could be a lens informed by positionality, informed by mainstream cultural messaging, informed by history textbooks, you know, all of these things. What kind of lens is one seeing the world through, and what does that lens distort? What does that lens render unseeable? And how does that relate to this kind of idea of bringing down the tower? I think that this is a really, really effective and thought-provoking and powerful image for the tower. And the guidebook goes on to include, for each of the majors, Tiana Lee McQuiller includes a plant, which in this case is oak, description of the image, which is the piece that I just read, some things about meaning of a card, and then some questions, or like some of them are questions, some of them are phrases, like consider the following if the card comes up. And some of the phrases include, why do you think that idea just came out of the blue? Perhaps it's not such a big surprise at all. You just weren't ready to see it. The truth hurts. And it talks about disruption and so on. So those are the 5 tower cards that I've chosen for Top Tarot Trumps. I will look forward to seeing what other tarot cards are chosen for this tower installment. And if you have particular tower cards that you find to be your favorite top tarot trumps of the tower, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Have a great day.